Okay, hello, dear colleagues. It is 1 minute before we start our annual Back to School conference, and we are really happy to see you all here. Uh, Before we actually start, please use the chat box and mark whether you see us, whether you hear us, and if possible, from where you are joining us. Uh, okay, hello from Dnipro, hello. Hello. Everybody is here and colleagues are joining. Черкаси is here, Lviv, Kiev, Біла Церква, Запоріжжя, Чернівці, Херсон, Одеса. Луцьк, Запоріжжя. I'm really happy. So it's 3 p.m. Kiev time. And we're ready to start. I am Inna Nistaiter and I am Macmillan Education consultant and methodologist. And I don't want to waste the time. Before I give the floor to our speaker, whom many of you know in person because she visited Ukraine and met with the teachers, I would like to make a very short announcement, several announcements. Of course, everybody will receive the certificate of participants. Then this conference is being recorded. So in some time, maybe 3 to 5 days, you will receive the recording. So please make sure that you are in the safe place because your safety is above all. And now on this moment, I'm giving the floor to our speaker and friend, Malgorzata, whom we call Gosha. Gosha, hello, and the floor is yours, and all the audience is yours. And I know that you don't know the geography of Ukraine very well, but believe me, there are teachers from all parts of our country.
Okay, it's such an honor to be here as always, and welcome everyone. I'm super happy to be here. Thank you for having me here. And let me just share my screen so you can see what I've prepared for today. And also I encourage you to be active in the chat window. I will be asking some questions, so don't be shy, write your comments and share your comments and your opinions. Let me just share the screen first, and maybe speaking of the chat window, if you could write in the chat window whether you can, let me just open the chat. All right, whether you can see the slides. All right, if you could just say like yes, we can see them, or like okay. All right, there should be the red, the red slide. Okay, yes, I can see some pluses, I can see a yes, many yeses. All right, excellent. So I think we're all set and we are ready to move on. We've got quite a lot to talk about today, as always. The representatives of Macmillan in Ukraine, they always, before we prepare the sessions, we always do, they always do some, we call it research, but like, they reach out to you, you're in touch. So they reach out to you to make sure that you get what you really need. We really want to make sure, I also want to make sure that the sessions, touch on the topics that are really useful for you and practical, and that this is something that you can really, use in your classroom, and it makes your life a little bit easier, and your life as a teacher also a little bit easier. And the topic for today is No Student Left Behind, how to make a great start of a new school year with your young learners. So we're starting with young learners. So we're going to have a look at the lowest grades. And as we start the school year in Germany, I am currently in Germany. In Germany, the school year has already started. I come from Poland. In Poland, it hasn't started yet. It starts next week. And in Ukraine, I believe it also starts in a week, right? So there's a lot going on. I'm sure that you all have quite a lot of work at the moment. We just talked to Ina right before the session that we are all just buried in work, which might be a tiring thing, but sometimes is also not so bad. I personally miss teaching, so I'm happy we're starting. But as we start a new school year, this is how I like to imagine that. So this is how I see my students. This is how I see my classroom when the door opens for the first time, or the metaphorical door if you teach online. Maybe some of you still teach online. When it opens for the first time in the new school year. And if you look closely at the picture, you can see there's this green patch, and there is this tiny little wooden house, which will represent the place where we left off last semester. Right, so we have our students, and let's say we taught them last year, so last semester, last year, and this is more or less where we got, this is where we expect to start. But if, again, you think of those levels here as your students, what happened here? Because some students are not here, some students are here, right? So what happened? Why are they here? We've covered the material. We've practiced it a lot. We've drilled. We've played a lot of games and listened to a lot of stories. And now some students, 2 months, and then they come to the classroom and you feel that they are not there anymore, but they used to be there, right? So what happened here? Does anyone have an idea? Please feel free to share in the chat window. And as you think about it, and as you share your ideas, I would like you to think about another thing that happens, which is this. Because also, to my experience, sometimes, after the holiday, I come back to my classroom and suddenly some students, that they used to be here, but they are here. So I saw that some of you started to write your ideas, and Mikola wrote that some students are a little bit, let's say, lower for the purpose of the session, because they had no practice, they're not ready to work. I think that's also a very good comment. Like, no practice is definitely true, but also they're still maybe, emotionally and mentally not there, not at school yet. Yeah, so lack of motivation. Yeah, they might have lost the motivation. Like during the school year, we are more or less in this sort of a rhythm, and then you have this long break, and it's very easy. It's kind of like with, I don't know, like maybe some of you do sports. I do sports regularly, and I try to do it every day, and then I don't do it for 2 days, and it's so difficult to get back to it. And I think maybe one more day, with like maybe a short walk, that would be enough. It's really difficult to get back to the rhythm. Yeah, they also, yes, stress, absolutely. We're going to cover all of those things. So thank you very much for your ideas. And does anyone have any ideas like why some students are actually a little bit higher? How is that possible? So again, we finished where you can see this green patch of grass and this rice, I think it is, and this little wooden house. And some students, come back, and they can, for example, name the family members from the book from last year, but they can also say, for example, I don't know the word, I don't know, parents, or know the word, I don't know, half sister, like things are not in the book, for example. They have revised, repeated some material. Maybe that's it, right? But then if they have, I would assume that they would still be in the, place where we left off. But yeah, some of you says that, yeah, extra work and apps. Yeah. And maybe they were motivated to know more. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So maybe they actually actively studied during the summer, right? Sounds like perfect students, but we know that in life doesn't always happen, right? But of course, there are different circumstances. So let's have a look at those circumstances. Thank you very much for sharing your ideas. And I encourage you to keep doing that throughout the webinar. So some students, I believe, are ready to pick up when where they have left off, where we have left off, because first of all, maybe they just simply have good memory, or also good learning strategies. Maybe they managed to figure out that actually, picture dictionaries are great, they love them, and this is what works for them. And maybe, this really clicked with them. They may have revised the material on their own. And now by this, I don't necessarily mean that they spent the summer, like, paging the books and just like revising everything. We're talking about very young learners here, but even listening to the songs from the course. This is also the revision, right? So maybe they did that, right? They might have. Maybe they have very engaged caretakers. Now, maybe they're caretakers, maybe they're English teachers. Who knows, right? Maybe they are. Or maybe it's really important to them that their children speak the language and they, take active part if they can, if they have the chance, they take active part in, making sure that the child doesn't forget. Now, some of the students have actually progressed. And this is what we've talked about, like you've mentioned some ideas before. They might have taken some summer courses, or one of you mentioned apps, or maybe a couple of you mentioned apps. Maybe they had some experience in, encountering someone who, for example, doesn't speak Ukrainian, and maybe they were saying hello in English, and it also gave them this boost of confidence, and and then they decided to try more. Those things happen. And maybe they got interested in the language. And the example I give here is the Baby Shark song. Do you remember there's this boom, like everyone was obsessed with this song, Baby Shark? I still have students, like, I'm sorry that I mentioned the title of this song, because I'm afraid that maybe now it's going to ring in your ears. I'm terribly sorry. I didn't mean to plant it there. But you know what I mean. Maybe they discovered, I don't know, a cartoon for children, which is in English, or some songs and so on and so forth, right? So this maybe made them interested. Maybe they listened to it for a long time. And that means that they might have learned some new words or some new phrases, right? Now, some of the students need much more support from day one. So even though you have covered the material with them and you have practiced everything, maybe they even passed some tests or some quizzes. Let's call them quizzes, right? We're talking about very young learners. And yet, after 2 months, roughly, right, they come back to the classroom and they cannot really, I don't know, name the colors and so on and so forth, right? And I think the reasons for that is, first of all, and this is heartbreaking, but also unfortunately really true, they might have experienced the crisis in their private life. And because of that, they might have been forced to focus on other matters, by which I mean, for example, like, they might have lost someone, they might have been relocated and so on and so forth. Now, those circumstances are really unusual, and generally in sessions we don't talk about them. But the fact is that there is a war happening, and children also experience that. And I think that because of that, they also might just not be there emotionally and also mentally. And I think, as much as it breaks my heart, this is a fact, and I think there's no point pretending that it's not there. So I think that's one thing. Which keeps them distracted. And of course, it's understandable. Every one of us is, right? They might have had no contact with English whatsoever, right? That also might be the reason they just closed the books, threw them to the drawer, and they did other things. Maybe they had a good time on holiday. Maybe they managed to travel somewhere. Maybe they visited their relatives, and and they were just not focused on that. And because, for example, because they didn't revise, and again, we're talking about very young learners, this is the very beginning of their learning journey, in learning a foreign language, they have just forgotten. And maybe simply languages is not their forte. Maybe they're just not very good at languages. Now, I don't necessarily believe in, dividing the students into good students and bad students, especially at the very beginning. I think that's a whole different conversation, right? But I think that at the very beginning, it's mostly about how engaged the students are and how motivated they are, rather than the skills themselves. I think the skills are not there yet. Later on, they might come in handy, but I think at the very beginning, when we operate on the word level, simple sentence level, there are a lot of songs, stories, and so on. I think it's mostly that. Okay, so here's what we know very well. All right. We definitely know that there are always some learning gaps between our students within one class. I have never in my life, and I've been teaching for, I don't know how many years now. I used to say 13, but I think at this point it's been closer to 15, maybe. I have never had a class in which there are no learning gaps. There were always some differences between the students, and I think it's just impossible not to have them, just because we're dealing with big groups. And some of you probably deal with groups of 30 students. Some of you might be lucky to have groups of, I don't know, 6 to 8 students, but still, there always will be some differences. I think we also know very well, and we should remember that there are some great diagnostic tools that can help us, spot certain issues, like spot those gaps and bridge them. So if you get the students on different levels, I mean, they're still within the same level, right? Within the same grade, but some of them know more words, some of them are confident in speaking, some of them have excellent pronunciation. Like if you face a group like that, you can use some diagnostic tools to see where the issue is, right? To find the very core of it and then to address it. And we will have a look at some of them in a moment. Okay, so we will actually focus on diagnostic tools today. And I think we also know very well that in order to deliver great lessons from which all students would benefit, it's also not a bad idea to actually think ahead as we teach, so it's easier for us in the future. Because maybe we can, while teaching new material, we can already think that this might turn into a gap next year because, for example, there's quite a lot here, it's quite complex, and we can already think about it before, we move on or as we're moving on, so it's easier for us to plan future lessons. We're already aware of what might happen. So those things I think we can agree that we know very well, but there are also some things that we tend to forget. I tend to forget them, and I have to keep myself reminded because I tend to be very harsh on myself, and I'm also a bit of a perfectionist. So I don't recommend that. I don't think it's good. I don't think it's healthy, but it is what it is. So we tend to forget that while we are professionals and we do our best, some things happening in our classroom are simply independent of us. So we can prepare, we can be like, take different courses, develop our skills as teachers, prepare excellent lessons, and, and prepare great games, and it's fun, entertaining, but also educational. And sometimes, the students still won't progress as much as we'd like them to, or as fast as we'd like them to. And it's not necessarily because of the lesson that we have prepared better or worse, right? It might be an excellent lesson, but because of all those factors that we have mentioned before, that maybe they're going through some emotional struggles. Maybe they are focused on other things at the moment, or maybe, I don't know, they don't have much motivation, not because they don't like our lessons, but because of multiple factors that you know best, right? So that's one thing. I think we also tend to forget that some lessons are better and some lessons simply don't quite work out the way we want them to. And sometimes we prepare a great lesson, which, it happened to me so many times, really, that I prepared this lesson. I was excited to give this lesson. I was like, this is the best lesson I have ever prepared. Then I got to the classroom and I teach the lesson and I see that it's getting worse and worse, and it's actually quite terrible. Maybe not terrible, but it's not the way I imagined. Not only was I hoping for it to be better, but actually I was sure that it would be better, but sometimes it just doesn't work out. Maybe it's because we put too much pressure on ourselves. Maybe, I think in my case, I get so excited, I overthink and overplan things, and this happens to me. So bear that in mind, that this it happens to everyone, and it will keep happening, and there's nothing wrong with that. We're only human, and I feel this is a natural way of, natural sort of moment in the teaching career. Like every once in a while, we just have a lesson which is not excellent, and that's fine. That's perfectly fine. And also something extremely important, and this is something that I really want you to remember throughout this session, is that while we want to give perfect lessons, we want to teach, we want our students to thrive, and we want them to be entertained, but we want them, we want to deliver high quality educational content. I think we should really focus on not necessarily delivering perfect lessons, but delivering good enough lessons. I think there's this big power in good enough. And a good enough lesson does not mean that there will be 10 different games and the students will, laugh out loud and they will just have so much fun. Like in the cinema, for example, when they watch their favorite movie, the good enough lesson would actually, tick all the boxes that it was supposed to tick, right? Would teach something it was supposed to teach, or if not teach, then practice, and so on and so forth. So it took me a lot of time, and I'm still learning this, but at the moment, I'm really not aiming for perfect. I am aiming for good enough because it takes up a lot of pressure. And I think it's worth remembering. I think everyone should remember, it's really worth remembering. All right. So one way of approaching this gap that we have mentioned before. So, what our students were supposed to know versus what they really know, what they were supposed to be able to do versus what they are able to do, is focusing on where we are with the students and where we want to be, right? I think it sounds reasonable, and I guess it is like that, right? Or is it? So I think very often when we think about the learning gaps and the differences in the level, just for the purpose of this session, let's call it the level, between our students, and we look at the weaker students and the stronger students, we really focus on the aim. So, okay, so we have to be here, and this is the material I have to deliver. This is my curriculum. My students, they have to be able to use present simple, right? Therefore, I need to, really focus on making them able to use this tense. Now, in building this bridge over the gap, I think sometimes we forget that there are different kinds of bridges. And if you want to get from one bank of the river to another, sometimes it's really enough to just take a rope and a couple of pieces of wood and just make the easiest rope bridge. You don't even need the wood for that. Sometimes rope is enough. It still gets you to the other shore, doesn't it? Right? Now, of course, if you have the means, if you have the time, if you have the tools and the skills, you can build this, beautiful concrete fancy bridge. Of course, no one's going to stop you. But I think that we should remember that bridging the gap can be done on different levels. And again, let's not aim for, this super fancy bridge. It's great. And if you have, if the circumstances allow, of course, go for it. But I think it's really okay to just focus on something which I refer to bare minimum. So I look where I am with my students, and I am in different places because I have a lot of students, right? So it's not like they're all in one place, right? Remember the rice terrace, right? They're all over the place. So I look where they are, I look where they're heading, and I want to know what's the bare minimum for my students to cross the river, right? Not how I want them to cross the river, but what's the bare minimum they have? How wide, how wide is the river? Is the rope enough? Maybe it's just a stream, or maybe it's a huge river, and actually I will need a little bit more tools, right? And of course, again, if circumstances allow, make it fancy, right? Ask yourself a question. Okay, so maybe the rope bridge is enough, but I think I can do a little bit more with this group, right? But I strongly believe that as long as your students can deliver the bare minimum, it's all right. They're making progress, and you stick to the curriculum, right? And we all know that curriculum is this, the cloud hanging above us, right? And we also have to, sometimes we have a bit more freedom, but usually we have to stick to it, and it's not so easy, right? But remember, as long as they can cross the river, it's fine. They're doing fine, and you're doing fine. So I want you to keep that in mind. Now, when we were preparing this session, we took requests, right? And many of you said, and those are the topics that usually repeat because they are challenging, and many of you said that you're mostly interested in reading, grammar, and vocab, which is completely understandable, especially with very young learners. Those can be challenging. We don't really, at this level, at least at the very beginning, we don't really teach grammar like we do on higher levels with, secondary students, but the grammar is there, right? We do teach it. But I would like to take a slightly different approach here. I don't necessarily want to divide, the session into focusing on reading, grammar, and vocab separately, because I strongly believe that reading is actually the combination of grammar and vocab, right? Would you agree with that? Because what makes you understand the text? Well, the words used in it and how they are connected. Now, of course, there are also different skills in reading, right? Because it's not only, words separated with commas, but also the words, have a certain meaning, and the text builds the context for this meaning. So, of course, there's much more to that. But generally speaking, on the most basic level, a text is a combination of grammar and vocab. So let's have a look like that. All right, let's have a look at it like that. Let's take this approach. And what we're going to do is, first of all, we're going to diagnose our classroom. Okay, so we're going to have a closer look at what we're really dealing with. And then we're going to enhance our lessons so all the students can benefit, so we can bridge this gap. So enhancing is this part where we build a bridge, and then we'll try to foresee. So we'll try to predict what might happen in the future, okay? But mostly today we focus on diagnosing and enhancing. So without further ado, let's have a look at what we have at the very beginning of the school year. And to give you an example, I chose 2 texts, all right? Remember, reading is a combination of grammar and vocab, right? So I chose 2 texts. And the first one on the left about durian fruit comes from one of the last units, or I think it's the last unit of level 1 book. I used Academy Stars here, but whichever book you work for, I recommend, it's always good to have a look at the last text that you did with your students and compare it with the first one they will have to do in the next year, right? So you can see like how big the jump is, right? You can see there's much difference. So the text about durian fruit and about was, by the way, I have never tried durian fruit. It's famous for smelling, like having this really strong smell. I have never tried it, but once I was in an Asian shop and I found durian candy and I bought it. And I mean, I did not dare to try it because I smelled it and I just couldn't. My boyfriend tried it and I asked him to actually go for a longer walk because the smell, like I also had to go out because the smell in the flat was just, that's very, very, very interesting fruit, right? So this is what the text is about. And then on the other side, we have the wolves. Now, if you look at those 2 texts, I know that you maybe can't read it. It might be a little bit too small, but it's fine. It doesn't matter because like visually you can still recognize the amount of volume, like how much text there is. And if you look at it, the volume is pretty much the same, right? It's more or less the same amount of text, isn't it, right? So here there's not so much difference, one would say. So why do my students struggle with reading texts after 2 months if the length is similar? And well, I took a closer look at both texts. Actually, I know them quite well, I have to admit, because I know the books really well. I know them almost by heart. And the difference is that in the second text, which is like one of the first lessons in grade 2, yes, the volume is the same, but the sentences are already longer, right? So, for instance, let me have a look. Okay, have a look at the first part of it, right? And you can see like the whole paragraph. Again, the sentences are quite short, but they're quite closely related to each other. So we have very clear paragraphs. Now, in the first text, the durian text, so the last text of the previous year, the sentences are much easier. Look, I like the taste of durians. They're yummy. You can eat durians alone. So even stylistically, the words would repeat because we're not there yet. But in the second text with the wolves, wolves can be gray, black, white, or brown. There are wolves in 60 countries. In Ukraine, Canada, India, and China. There aren't any wolves in Australia. You see, so you already have like a little bit more advanced sentences. It's not like wolves are yummy, or maybe not yummy here, but wolves are cute, right? So this is the first difference. And now, this is what you're facing. So let's have a look at this text and let's think about the context in which the students see it for the first time. So here's what you have around the text and before you actually get to it. All right, so the text is not the first lesson on the first day of the school year, right? It's part of the unit, and before you make it to the text, there is also some vocab and some grammar that you teach. So this is what you have before you even get to the text. And I actually did quite a thorough analysis of this text to show you that the things highlighted in green, this is the same text, right? It's just different format, but so I could highlight it. But the things highlighted in green are the things that your students learn around this text. They learn it this year, not the previous year. It's not something that they should have learned before. It's something they are learning at the moment. So if you look at it, half of the text, they already will be quite familiar with because this is your previous maybe 1 or 2 lessons, all right? Those are new things, but the things they have recently learned. But if you keep looking, you can see that there's still about half the text, maybe 60% of the text left. So I would like you to have a look at it now and tell me, like, if you could name the things that occur in the text that your students, you would expect them to know them, that they might have forgotten. So something that they should have learned before that maybe you remember you have covered before in grade 1. Okay, here we are in grade 2. Think about what you do in grade 1 and have a look here. I'm going to show you in a moment, but first I'd like to hear a couple of ideas, give you a moment to think about it. Okay, we have irregular plurals. Yes, we have 2 irregular plurals. Very well. So we have wolves and we also have fish. Excellent. Numbers. Big numbers are actually highlighted with green because big numbers, it's, sorry for changing the slide for a second, it's part of this lesson. Above the text, you actually have big numbers. But yes, generally numbers, maybe before you get to big numbers, you should, you know, the students have to remember numbers from 1 to 10 also. We have countries, modal verb can, it appears in the song in this unit. But yes, so you would listen to the song, it would appear there, but it might, you know, need a little bit more revision. But we also have names of countries. We have has got, have got, right? Yes, some, any, possessives. Exactly. So you see, so like again, the things highlighted in green. So for example, there are, or there is, this is part of this lesson, or at least this unit, right? But for example, wolves are big, the verb to be is not the part of it. Now, I have chosen a couple of structures here that I think my students might struggle with. And I have chosen, first of all, colors, right? You have quite a lot of colors here. I have chosen have got because the sentences with have got, they've got a long tail, they've got 42 teeth, this mother's got 4 cubs. They actually contain quite a lot of information, right? And after all, we read text to get information from it. So wolves are big. I assume my students would understand it, but I highlighted the word big and I highlighted some nouns and adjectives because I feel that maybe, you know, maybe they remember the word big, but maybe they're not sure about the word tail, have long tail here, right? Or for example, birds and fish, we have irregular plurals here also, right? Maybe they remember names like mom, dad, uncle, and auntie, but family, maybe they don't. So anyway, so I've highlighted some things, and this is where I expect to have the learning gaps. So see what I've done here. Before I even started the lesson, I looked at what I was going to be teaching, and I tried to foresee where the gaps might occur, right? And then the next thing I do, remember I talked about the bare minimum. So of course, ideally, I would like my students to understand every single word in the text. But if you think about it, reading is not really about understanding every single word. Reading is practicing the skill of getting information from the text. And there will be some words that they won't understand, right? So for example, kilometers per hour, I would probably, like, I think like in cases like that, I actually sometimes also use Polish, which is my native language, to my Polish students, just to give them the name, because I feel that this is just not really the content of my lesson, right? This is not the aim. The aim is for them to understand the information behind, you know, the big numbers, for instance, and having things like and things existing, right, and countries. So so again, it like the fact that something is not covered does not mean that, you know, we ignore it. It's just that we have to focus on the most important things. Remember, the bare minimum. Now, if you look at the next thing, which is the task that the students are faced with. So they see the text, and this is the task. Wolf facts. Look what information they have to find in the text, right? So do they have to find the colors? Well, they do. As you can see, there are quite a lot of things here that concern big numbers. Big numbers is one of the focuses of the lesson. So we have a body centimeters long. So that would be a big number, right? Tail, also teeth. There would be like the number of teeth, right? Can run at, so the speed, right? Look, all of them are, oh, and also number in a pack. So look, most of it is actually numbers. So even though, you know, numbers are just a small part of the text, most of what your students need to actually perform the task, to do the bare minimum, is the big numbers. right? But they would also need colors. They also need to understand the structure with have got, because I'm going to jump back to the text now, because they have got 42 teeth, right? So they need to understand the word teeth, which is, oh, sorry, that's a third irregular plural. There are three, right? Quite a lot. They have to understand the word teeth. They have to understand that they have got 42 teeth, right? So it's kind of important. And also some nouns and adjectives, for example, birds and fish, right? Those were also highlighted. So at this point, I already know that my students, to perform the bare minimum, apart from what we are learning in this very lesson, they would need have got, they would need colors, and they would need nouns and adjectives. All right. Now, we're not moving on from here now. We are talking about diagnosing here. Okay. So I'm not going to address it now. I'm just going to give you another example. Okay. And then we'll think of how to, how to do it. Okay. But now we're just focusing on seeing where the gap is, because the gap might be where you don't expect it, really, or the gap might be much smaller than you would expect. Right? So this is extremely important, right? Where we start, like what we really need, the bare minimum to build this bridge. Let's have a look at another example, right? And this time we have a longer text, right? But it's further on in one of the further units. And this is a text about traveling, about going on holiday. As you can see, you already have quite a lot of visual supports here. So there's quite a lot you would probably do before reading. We'll look at the pictures, maybe name some things in the pictures, right? And you also have a little glossary with 5 words like airport, fly, holiday, sunglasses, South Africa, right? Let's have a look at the task. Okay, so here's the text, here's the task. If you look at the task, what's the bare minimum in terms of language that the students need to understand it and to find the information in the text? What is the bare minimum they need from the text? What things do they need to be able to understand in terms of grammar and vocab? All right, I'd be happy for you to share some ideas in the chat window. Seasons, yes, definitely. It's winter in Canada. They have to understand seasons. Present simple, well, generally, yes. At this level, I would still probably, I think I have used the word present simple before, but generally I would operate on like structures rather than their names. So I would say, for example, he is, she is, right? Or he lives, she lives, right? So, but yes, this is present simple, absolutely. Countries, yes, we have South Africa here. They have to understand it. They have it in the glossary also, right? But they do have to understand it, absolutely. Some free time activities. Number 5, Alice likes having picnics on the beach. Yes. Like and doing something. Yes, this structure also, absolutely. So yes, so let me just sum it up. So they need seasons, they need countries, they need family members also. Jake's big sister, right? I don't know if you've mentioned that. Maybe there's a lot of answers in the chat window. If I haven't noticed it, I'm terribly sorry. But let me just put it here. So family members, also some activities. Right. And yes, there is also this grammatical aspect here, like doing something, which is part of like the activity. I threw it into this activity section, but I am actually going to divide it in a moment because I want to show you another task. Okay, so this is one task in which the students choose true, false sentences. Oh no, sorry. Before we move on to the next task, I just want to show you So from the bare minimum that they need, seasons, countries, family members, activities, this is part of this lesson, all right? So this is part of this unit, maybe not the lesson, but the unit. This is what they have learned very, very recently. So you can already see that they have seasons and they have certain activities, which means, right, and having picnics, we have this activity here, have a picnic, which means that the gap may occur in the names of countries and family members, right? Because the remaining things that they need to perform this task, they already have in this lesson, all right? Or around this lesson, maybe in the previous lesson or 2 lessons ago, but it's quite fresh. It's not last year, it's this year, and rather fresh. Okay, now we can jump to the next task, still the same text, but there are 2 tasks here. All right, so one is true, false. We need countries, family members. This is where the gaps may appear, right? Now, of course, there might be some other parts of the text that they don't understand. Maybe there are, I don't know, names of animals that they will not remember, but they don't really need it here, right? So don't focus on details, right? Focus on the bare minimum. They really don't need it here. Okay, and this is the second task, right? What can you do in South Africa when it's winter in Canada? And here you can see we have some activities. And just to remind you, certain activities were part of this unit, right? You can see them here. But you can also see that we need clothes and we need some more activities because we have 4 activities in this unit, right? Prior to this lesson, we have practiced 4 activities. But here we also have, for example, swim in the sea, which my students have actually learned before. They learned it in grade 1, like, I swim. But, it's not here, so this might be the gap, right? So we have clothes and some activities. So for the whole text, what my students need is, grammatically speaking, some activities, right? Having a picnic in a park. And in terms of vocab, they need clothes, countries, and family members. Okay, this is where you can expect the gaps. Now, does it mean that the gaps will be there? Not necessarily, but we might expect them there. Which means that we also should check if they are really there, because there is no point, wasting. I mean, I think that like learning anything or revising things, even if your students are good with it, it's never wasting time. But let's see, we can use this time otherwise, considering how loaded our curriculums are. Maybe let's use it for other things. So I think it's extremely important to check if the gaps are really there, because one thing you do is you predict if there are any gaps, if there might be any gaps, but then you need this sort of reality check. Okay, are they really there? Because maybe there's a potential gap in the names of colors, and then it turns out that your students just, they know them very well, like, forwards and backwards, and there's no need to spend much more time on that. Okay, so how do I check whether there are some gaps? First of all, I explore the book. Now, this is grade 2 we're talking about. Of course, we can take grade 3 and have a look at the book from grade 2 or grade 1 and so on. You can have grade 1 and have a look at their books from kindergarten if it's possible for you, if you have a chance. But generally, I explore, I like to use what I already have, because it's really important to me not to spend too much time on preparing things. Definitely, I don't want to prepare things twice, right? If I've done it before, I can reuse it. So I'm going to explore the book. And this is, just to remind you, this is grade 2. This is what I found in grade 1, right? So I went to Picture Dictionary at the end, and look, I have some activities. Now, you don't see all of them here because there was not enough space on the slide, but you're likely to find swimming there, right? You have family members. There's the word sister that you need. And you also have some countries, right? And you also have some clothes, right? So everything you need, you already have there. And now, what can you do with this to check if the gaps are really there? So what I like to do is I like to run one activity, a short activity that would either combine all of those words, or, it would just, let's say, take activities and I'll just run a 2-3 minute long game just to check if my students remember it at all. So with the picture dictionary, for instance, that you have seen before, I would maybe play a quick game of find and point, right? So I say the word, they have to find it and point to it, right? Maybe cover and guess. So we, look at the words, I cover one word and they have to guess what's there, right? Or maybe finger twister, right? I'm going to get to details in a moment, right? So I'll just run one quick game, maybe a short quiz. If you have the time, you can always prepare some, online quizzes, right? I'm going to talk about it in a second. You can also use flashcards. There's so many games with flashcards. Now, I don't necessarily want to walk through many of them here, because I'm sure that you already have your favorite games. I'm sure that you already know a lot, and you probably know enough to really, survive, go through the whole, step proudly through the whole school year. So it's not about that, right? here the focus is again like analyzing, diagnosing, and like taking it step by step to know where the gaps are that we want to address. So yeah, so you can play some flashcard games, or as I said, if you have the time, you can use some online tools like Kahoot or Quizlet, or there are many, many more. I use them sometimes if there are sets available. Sometimes there are ready-made sets. I don't always like to prepare sets because I think it's quite time consuming. And to be honest, I just prefer flashcards because I always have them at hand. But of course you can do it. You can, keep your folder with Kahoots and Quizlets. Maybe you also, keep them for the next year, so then you can reuse them and so on. You can have a group quiz, so it does not feel like a test, or you can even use some, movers, starters, Cambridge exam type tasks. You can also find quite a lot of them, many of them also online. Why not? Okay, so we have diagnosed, seeing two examples of lessons or of reading tasks, we have diagnosed our students. So we already know what the gaps might be, what the bare minimum to achieve them is, and we have already checked how to make sure that the gaps are already there, so we don't spend time on doing something that is not necessarily the priority. So now we're going to move on to enhancing our lessons, right? And having done all of those things, it's time to build the bridges, all right? And now I am going to do something, I always do it. I like to have a handful of useful resources, but I don't like to have too much because, too much of a good thing. So I would have, like, let's say 10 favorite games and activities that require no or little preparation. By little preparation, I mean literally taking out the flashcards, or preparing small slips of paper no longer than, 3 minutes, or asking my students to do it. So I like to reuse them, right? And have a look here. There are some tasks that we have used to check if there are any gaps. And let's say you do one of them, or you run a quiz, there are more, and you see that there are some gaps, so you want to spend more time on it. So look, you can use, for example, find and point to check if there is a gap. And then you can use cover and guess, or run, which I'm going to explain in a moment, to practice, to revise, to bridge this gap, right? Same exercises, they can serve two different purposes. So let me give you some examples, all right? So here are some hands-on examples, so feel free to take them, use them on Monday. If you already start on Monday, if you start 1 week later, then use them 1 week later. So the first one is very simple, find and point. In the very basic version, the super basic rope bridge, the teacher says a word and the students have to find it in the picture dictionary, which they see in front of them, or maybe on the screen, and they have to point to it, right? Now, as we said, we can also make the bridges more fancy. So you can divide your class into groups or pairs, depending on, their, let's say, level. Again, I'm sorry for using this word, but for the lack of a better word. And you can also give them a more difficult version, which is one student says a word and then the other student has to point it. So they take more active part in it. It's not me reading out the words, it's them, right? Or you can use the first part to, the first round to diagnose, and the second one to enhance, right? So you can also do the same exercise twice, starting with the easy version, moving on to the more difficult version, right? So that's one thing. Now, another thing, cover and guess, and you can use it with the picture dictionary. You can take a piece of paper and just cover some pictures. You can also use flashcards, of course, right? So in this case, one student, in the simplest version, the bare minimum, one student covers a word from one set, and the other student has to guess which word has been hidden. I'm sure you know this game. I'm sure you're familiar with it. You might have played it. If you haven't, please do. It's awesome. Students love it. It's super easy, no prep, and it works. That's the magic. Now, you can also play the same game on a more advanced level, in which students play a guessing game, building longer dialogues. And look, this is what I found in grade 1, right? There is a dialogue which actually contains all of those words that we want to revise to bridge the gap, right? One dialogue, everything is there, right? What are you doing? I'm looking for my brother, right? What is he wearing? We have clothes. What is he doing? He's skating. We have activities. right? And we also have family members. Yes, of course, brother. So your students could also make dialogues like that. This is an activity, an exercise from grade 1. So we are in grade 2. We can just take what we've already done. It combines everything we need for this text, right? Now, finger twister and memory. Finger twister is my all-time favorite. So we have a picture dictionary, right? And students say words, single words. For example, I don't know. Yeah, let me show you. For example, a jacket, and they have to put their finger on a jacket. Then the next student says socks, and they have to put their finger on the socks, and they just play together. So it's like this twister game on the floor, but with fingers. And it's very easy to make it more difficult or to make it more challenging. Let's not call it difficult, let's call it challenging. It's very, very easy. It's enough to ask your students to just make full sentences. Instead of saying a jacket, or instead of saying a skirt, you would say, I'm wearing a pink skirt. So we already have long sentences. Then you make sure that all students are, equally challenged depending on what they're capable of at the given moment, right? And remember, your bare minimum is the words, understanding the words. Now, using sentences, I'm wearing a pink skirt, this is building a fancy bridge, but you're free to do so, especially if you have students who remember the words and you want them to also be active in the lesson so they don't lose motivation. The beginning of the session, remember, those were your ideas. Also, the motivation, extremely important. Now, another thing that you can do is, and this is something that I would actually do quite often, and because I see great potential in it, and I think it's extremely useful to teach the students to categorize. It's also one of the cognitive skills that I focus, and I put quite a lot of focus into, developing, because, I still do it in my adult life. I still categorize things when I learn something, for example, German, which is a struggle, I have to admit. So I wanted to revise, to bridge the gap, which is family clothes activities. I would take the words from the text, right? Or probably also throw in some more text. Write them on pieces of paper or just quickly print them out and cut, like whatever you can do, or use the flashcards. You probably have all of them on the flashcards. And and I would make 3 categories, family close activities. You can also do it on a board, right? You don't necessarily need flashcards. You can just, write first letters or draw very simple pictures on the board. And my students have to put them in correct categories, right? So look, they revise the vocabulary, but they also, they focus not only on single words, but also put them in groups. So it's easier for them to understand the meaning, right? Now it's also easier for them to make associations, right? So, we have jump, which is an activity, but we also have jumper, which is, a piece of clothing, right? And of course, if you want to make it a little bit more difficult, you can just give them first letters. Or go crazy and say, okay, we've got 3 categories. Now we work in 2 big groups and write as many words for each category as you can and see what they remember, right? You can use it as a diagnostic tool, but you can also use it to enhance your lessons. You can really, this is something that I do often, and I really encourage you to do it. You don't always have to come up with new games and new activities. You can use one activity for multiple purposes. Do it. You really don't have to go, all the way to, provide super entertaining lessons. They are entertaining enough with this, right? Okay. So just to sum this up, with those things that you have just done, weaker students have tailor-made revision tasks, right? So they do the very, very minimum. Stronger students, they get more challenge, right? So for example, instead of using words, they would use longer sentences. Now, all students are ready for the next step, which is the text, right? And again, maybe the stronger students will do it a little bit faster, right? But maybe the weaker students will need a little bit more time to do the task, but they all have at least the very minimum they need to perform the task, plus some of them have already practiced a little bit more because, for instance, they're stronger, right? So we're here. All right, so we have diagnosed, we have enhanced certain tasks. Now let's think about the future for a moment. And here I have a couple of questions to you, all right? So first of all, and I would like you to answer in the chat window, I'm really curious about what you have to say. Is it possible, in your opinion, to avoid learning gaps in the future? There a chance to, avoid them? Oh, I see all of you say no, absolutely not. There will be learning gaps. It's impossible. They might be bigger or smaller, but they will be there. And I think there is no point letting yourself be frustrated that the gaps appear, because they will. Now, bear in mind that the reasons for the gaps are so many that you simply have no control over it. And it's very difficult to, to admit that you don't have like full control over, your classroom, but you don't, and you won't, right? So that's the first thing. So is there anything we can do to minimize the learning gaps in the future? Because it's certain there will be there, and there's no way we ever, get rid of them. Is there anything we can do to minimize them? Maybe you have some ideas. Now, that's still some answers, no, in the chat window, but I think it's still the answer to the previous question. So I am not sure if, or maybe you're saying no here. Spring revision, yes. All right. Spring revision, yes. Well, generally speaking, the more often you do revisions, the better, right? But also, yeah, it depends on factors. Yes, I mean, of course, sometimes you'll probably also have the break maybe in lessons because your lessons are interrupted because you have to run to the shelter. And this is a terrible reality, but the reality nonetheless, right? So yeah, so sometimes this also, of course, has an impact. That's why, like the more revisions you throw into your lessons, the better. Absolutely. Revision is absolutely necessary, but using the diagnostic tools here, you can be more aware of what to revise, right? Once in a while. Okay, I have put some of my ideas here. First of all, know your books. This is something like we have worked for quite some time together. I have given quite a lot of sessions for Ukraine. I had a pleasure to also visit you in person a couple of years ago. And we did some sessions about really getting to know your book. And I think it's incredibly important because you have a lot of free resources there. You have game banks. You have lessons plans written by people who did a lot of good work. So I always, I like to benefit from their work because they did it well, so I don't have to do it and I trust them. Definitely know your books. Know what your students have learned. Know what your students will be learning, right? It does not mean that you have to know it by heart, but have the general idea of what's going on. Don't only look at one lesson, all right? Look back, look ahead. Now, reuse some activities that have worked in the past. If your students love a certain game, reuse it. If your students love Simon Says, which for some reason they all do, reuse it if it works for you, right? You don't always have to come up with new tasks and new games. Have your own game bank with 3 or 4 no prep or low prep activities you can easily adjust. And this is something that I always have because sometimes you also may not foresee the gap that suddenly appears to be there. And then it's always good to have, like a quick domino or like a quick bingo game, that you can just quickly distribute, as an emergency, right? Now, I'm not going to tell you what games. Take the games that you like, take the games that work for you, take the games that your students like. This is for you to decide. You're great teachers, you're experienced, you know your students. It's not so much about the game that you choose. It's more about what you choose to do with it and which chunk of material you choose to revise with it, as we said, right? The bare minimum you need to bridge the gap, right? And also, last but not least, cut yourself some slack, because I think that you're really doing just fine, considering the circumstances under which you have to work. And considering the circumstances under which your students have to study, you are all superheroes. And if something doesn't work out, if you see that you're doing all your best to bridge the gap, to help the weaker students catch up, but it doesn't work the way you've planned, cut yourself some slack, keep doing your good job, they will get there. Just keep doing the good job, you're already doing fine. So I think it's really important to take care of your well-being, not only your safety, which obviously is the most important thing, but also your well-being. You're doing an extremely difficult but also excellent job. So bear that in mind. All right, so the time has come for us to slowly wrap up this session. But before we do, just one very quick task for you. We don't have much time to do it together, but let me just walk you through it. Next time you plan the lesson and you expect some gaps to be there, and you do expect that it's the beginning of the school year, so of course there will be gaps. Look what you can do. First of all, look at the text and have a look at and think about what gaps you can expect. Let me just walk you through it. Here, there's a text about the safety on the road, and you can see a lot of structures: don't play, don't walk, don't cross, and so on. So you can guess that this is the target language, but there's also, you can't see cars. They can't see you. Now, this is something that I don't expect to be the target language here. And I think this is a place where the gap might be. Now, I know where the gap might be. How am I going to check it? Which game am I going to choose, or which exercise I'm going to choose to check if there's a gap? Choose your favorite, right? I'm not going to choose for you. Choose your favorite, you know best. Now, how am I going to bridge the gap for my weaker students? And also, how am I going to engage my stronger students, right? It's a grammatical structure, so maybe the weaker students will just say the word can, and then the stronger student says, I can jump. And then the weaker student says can't, and the stronger student says, I can't swim, and they have to react, right? Maybe you can do that. What else can you do? You can think about how much time before this lesson you would need to address those issues. I would say with this, now I have done this many times, so now it really takes me, I would say, up to 5 minutes. I'm not lying here, like it's super fast. But at the beginning, I'll say up to 10 minutes, right? If you haven't done that before, if it's new, I would say up to 10 minutes, but no more. Don't spend too much time on that, right? You have all the knowledge you need. Now it's just getting used to the method. And one last question is, how much time will it take during the lesson? Because, I mean, it's cool to revise, but we also have, the curriculum to stick to. I would say those exercises, well, it depends. Ideally, they would take no longer than 10 minutes. If I see the gap is huge, I would spend even half the lesson on that, because there's no point rushing with the material if like the only result is the gap getting bigger and bigger. I think it makes more sense to bridge the gap, like build a solid bridge and then move on. You will have the time to catch up, right? You will maybe, I don't know, choose not to do one reading, choose not to do one song. You will find this time, right? But don't hurry. Make sure that you build a bridge that would actually last for a very long time. So thank you very much. That's all from me in this session. And thank you very much for being so active also in the chat window. And now I am going to take a quick break while Ina takes over. And I will also meet maybe some of you in the next session. The next session, the focus is not young learners, but teenagers. And the topic is the same, but I will not really repeat things that I've said here. I will focus on slightly different things. So even though we still talk about the same topic, it will look slightly different. So you're very, very welcome to join me for the next session. And if you have to go, then thank you very much for attending. And I'm hoping to see you soon. I'm really hoping to see you in person, sooner than later. Thank you very, very much. And I'm wishing you all the best and stay safe. And thank you very much for attending.
Thank you very much, Gosha. I'm switching into Ukrainian. Зараз, поки наша шановна спікерка відпочиває, я хотіла б познайомити вас з тією інформацією і з тими подарунками корисними, які ми підготували, вся наша команда підготувала протягом літніх місяців, і нагадати про те, що вже є. У нас, одну секунду, зараз я поділюся своїм екраном. Ми зараз я сподіваюся, що зараз ви бачите мій екран. Ми зараз знаходимося на сайті нашого представництва macmillanуkraine.com. І тут є каталог, є інструкції, є аудіоресурси, є розділ для викладачів, є розділ дистанційного навчання. Тут всі ресурси, які є в наявності, вони всі є безкоштовними, за них нічого не треба платити, треба просто бути зареєстрованим користувачем сайту. Але зараз на початку навчального року я хочу звернути вашу увагу на розділ тестування ЗНО ДПА. Коли ще починалася пандемія COVID-19, таке враження, що це було якось у позаминулому житті, ми взяли тести, які є у ресурсах до кожного нашого підручника, і зробили їх автоматичними з тим, щоб вчителі, навіть працюючи дистанційно, навіть працюючи онлайн, мали змогу діагностувати своїх учнів. І ось на початку навчального року, мені здається, варто нагадати, що у вас є така опція, якщо ви користуєтеся нашими підручниками, а трошки згодом я розкажу про опцію для тих, хто не користується нашими підручниками, але таке ж має змогу скористатися такою діагностикою. Отже, діагностичні тести до абсолютно кожного курсу на початок навчального року, виконання яких покаже вам, чи є ці самі knowledge gaps, які варто закривати на початку навчального року. Чи, можливо, навпаки, у ваших учнів все окей, все нормально. Наприклад, до курсу Academy Stars, на основі якого була щойно чудова сесія, ось можна скористатися, наприклад, end of the year тест, тобто тест, чим ми закінчували попередній навчальний рік, і з чого ми починаємо, чи все залишилося нормально. Пам'ятаєте ось цю дуже яскраву метафоричну фотографію на початку сесії Гоші. До другого, до третього і так далі. Все тут перевіряється автоматично. Вчитель у своєму особистому кабінеті може отримати результати, побачити, що учні власне знають, не знають, забули, не забули. Є ось такий порадник, як працювати з результатами діагностичних тестів і, власне, самі тести. Можливо, ви не дуже хочете проводити це в режимі онлайн, особливо, наприклад, якщо це стосується учнів 2 класу, 3 класу, ви не дуже впевнені, що вони зможуть виконати онлайн-тест, то тут є і паперові версії, які можна завантажити і виконати їх перед початком роботи з конкретним рівнем конкретного курсу. А тепер, повертаючись до того, якщо ви ще не працюєте з нашими підручниками, у вас інші підручники, але ви все ж таки хочете продіагностувати своїх учнів і зрозуміти, чи є gaps, чи виконали ви вимоги нашого стандарту, наших державних програм, так, на кінець 2 класу, на кінець 4 класу, на кінець навіть 5 класу ми підготували, і це відбулося дивом саме сьогодні, завершилися усі роботи, ми підготували ось такі тести. Рівень А1 – це на кінець 4 класу, на початок 5 класу, listening, тест listening і тест reading writing, які не прив'язані до якогось конкретного підручника, вони прив'язані до загальноєвропейської рамки. MELTS – це Macmillan English Language Testing System, це наша система нашого видавництва тестування онлайн. Ви бачите, що тут Safer Level A1 Listening, Reading and Writing. Це на початок 5 класу. Є тренувальний тест, тобто, щоб діти могли потренуватися, як це працювати з комп'ютерним тестом. Є рівень А1+, це той рівень, який учні мають показати, умовно показати в кінці 5 класу, і з цього розпочати 6 клас, ось це MELTS A1+. І Pre-A1 – це кінець 2 класу, тобто ми починаємо 3 клас з того, що у учнів є рівень Pre-A1, і тут також є listening part і reading part. У особистому кабінеті вчителя, знову я повертаюся нагору, ось тут, там, де відповіді, там же є і паперові версії цих тестів, тобто якщо ви все ж таки не дуже схильні до того, щоб це був computer-based тест, можна скористатися паперовою версією, тим більше, що в паперовій версії також є завдання для speaking і для writing як writing. Це те, що підготували ми, наше видавництво для всіх вчителів. І зараз я хочу запустити невеличке опитування, на основі якого ми зможемо відкрити тим, кого це дійсно цікавить, відкрити той доступ до онлайн-тесту. Буде лише 2 запитання. Причому перше запитання буде стосуватиметься ще одного нашого такого подарунку. Ми підготували повноцінний тематичний розділ до курсу Academy Stars, 2-й клас. І якщо, наприклад, ви працюєте у 2-му класі і працюєте не з нашими підручниками, але вам дуже хотілося б спробувати зробити це безкоштовно, ми готові, якщо ви знаходитесь десь, де є представники Macmillan Education, а це дуже багато різних регіонів, це не тільки місто Київ і Київська область, то ми готові приїхати і привезти вам набір ось такого пробного юніта для того, щоб ви могли попрацювати, тобто роздати своїм учням і спробувати попрацювати з даним ресурсом. І для того, щоб це стало можливим, я прошу вас відповісти на 2 запитання. Вони, ці відповіді, ні до чого вас не зобов'язують, але дають вам можливість скористатися тими подарунками, які ми підготували для вас. Отже, зараз на екранах у вас з'явилося опитування, тут є 2 запитання, і за результатами ваших відповідей, там, де вас це дійсно цікавить, або я, або мої колеги, ми найближчим часом з вами зв'яжемося і дамо відповідь, і або відправимо, або приїдемо особисто і привеземо ті матеріали, які вас зацікавили. Ось такі подарунки ми готували всією нашою командою протягом літа. Є ще час, поки наша спікерка трошечки відпочиває перед наступною сесією. Я бачу, що ви даєте свої відповіді. Я дуже вдячна вам за таку вашу досить активну участь. Я обожнюю, коли вчителі, які приходять на наші заходи, такі активні. Так відбувається, до речі, завжди. Є ціла низка вчителів з усіх куточків нашої країни, які нас знають, нам довіряють тій якості, яку пропонує наше видавництво і з точки зору ресурсів, і з точки зору методичної підтримки і професійного розвитку. Ще йдуть відповіді, трошечки ми ще почекаємо, наша спікерка підготується, перелаштується з початкової школи на середню школу. Поки ви відповідаєте, я спробую, можливо, показати сутність одного з діагностичних тестів. І давайте ось зараз, оскільки ми перелаштовуємося вже з початкової школи на середню школу, на 5 класи, наведу приклад з діагностичного тесту з All Clear for Ukraine. Ось, наприклад, на початок 6 класу такий діагностичний тест. Ми запускаємо тест, тут є обмеження в часі, до кожного тесту є обмеження в часі, натискаємо «Почати» і іде спочатку йде listening, тобто учні слухають, дають відповіді, йдуть далі. Не буду зараз відповідати на запитання тесту, бо я все ж таки, як адміністратор, це не дуже буде коректним. Тут різні завдання, різнопланові завдання. Прямо тут учні можуть слухати, ставити на паузу, але, бачите, іде відлік часу. Наприклад, далі є ось такі завдання на перевірку, чи є gaps, не перевірка, а діагностика, чи є gaps в reading comprehension, і це, наприклад, завдання на true-false, тобто у учнів перед очима є текст, який відповідає тому рівню, який вони би мали виявити на початок 6 класу, і мені здається, навіть було б цікаво провести таку діагностику і, можливо, переконатися, що у вас суперкласні учні, і з точки зору, наприклад, skills, like reading comprehension or listening comprehension, у них все окей. І тоді ви можете спокійно рухатися далі за програмою, за тим курсом, з яким ви працюєте. Або діагностика виявить ті прогалини, де потрібна ваша увага і ваша їхня допомога. Це ось reading, vocabulary, і можна повертатися назад, можна йти далі, і далі, коли учень натискає на кнопку «Завершити», одразу отримає він результат або вона результат, і ви, як вчитель, у своєму особистому кабінеті також отримаєте результат всієї вашої групи або всього вашого класу. Я раз повернуся до особистого кабінету, я просто на нього натискаю. І ось у мене є така кнопочка «Завантажити результати». Вони завантажуються, я одразу бачу, мені так буде простіше, наприклад, проводити аналіз того, що зробили мої учні для того, щоб спланувати свою роботу. Я бачу, що всі, хто мав бажання пройти опитування, пройшли опитування. Я зупиняю демонстрацію свого екрану, завершую опитування